Hey everyone. So today we're going to be looking at some Illustrator tips and tricks. Hopefully you were here for the lecture, and this is kind of a review, just a recap on some of the things that we talked about so that you guys can go back on your own time and check this out in a little bit more detail. So the first thing we're going to look at here is selecting and using colors, both globally and being able to select them in different ways. So I have some different boxes here with some different colors that I'm using, and I've actually already gone through and saved these out as swatches. Anytime you need to save out a new swatch, as long as you have that specific color selected, you can just come over here to the swatch palette and click new swatch down here, and that will bring up a new swatch window. One thing that's important to remember is to click global as you guys are doing this so that we can make some global changes here, and you'll see why in a second. So once I've saved out all of these specific swatches, I can basically take all of them and come in here to the new color group. And with that, we can title that whatever we would like. So I just have these new swatches here that all have to do with this specific illustration, and those can all be found within each one of these shapes. So I have the blue for the fill, and on the stroke I'm using the green. These ones have some different transparencies being used, obviously a solid, and then another solid with a stroke, and then another shape that has a pattern that we've included inside, which is using our pink here as well. So we're using all three of these colors to create each one of these shapes. So one thing that we could do is, I'm just going to make a couple of copies of these so we can see this being used. So one thing that we could do is we could use our magic wand tool. With our magic wand tool, we can go over and select specific colors. And what that's going to do is it's going to select anything that has that fill within it, right? Or that specific pattern, or that color with the opacity there as well. So that is one way that we could utilize the magic wand tool and select some tools, but it doesn't get quite as specific. So for example, if I wanted to select everything that was blue and had this green stroke to it, another thing that I could do would be just select that shape, come up here to the select tool, and go to same. And within this, it has a bunch of different options. You could do whatever has that fill color in it, whatever has the fill and stroke, whatever has the opacity, so on and so forth. So let's do the fill and stroke here, and what that's going to do is it's actually going to select everything that has a blue fill and a green stroke. So in another case, I might want to select this green. Well, if we tried to use the magic wand to select this green, it's going to select all the greens, whether they're opaque or not. Then let's say we just wanted to select the greens with that opacity that we've selected there of 46. So same thing, I could go to select same and go to opacity, and then it would select all the shapes that just have that opacity. It doesn't really matter on the specific color that you're using there. So that's another way that we could use that there as well. One other cool thing is, so I've made my swatches and I've actually separated them into these this new color group down here. So let's say we're working on a large illustration and we're utilizing, a handful of colors, and we want to make some global color changes to all of these colors that are being used within the entire illustration as a whole. Maybe we want to change a yellow to more of a marigold, or a blue to some sort of green or something like that. Well, instead of having to go into each one of these, select, maybe go into the different gradients that are being used, change the colors throughout that, and then also the different patterns that are being used and change the colors. That can be a bit of a hassle. So one way that we can do this is just by changing these global colors on the fly through the swatches. So if I double click into one of these colors here, it was really, I brought up that it was important to select this global, and the reason why is if I click the preview button here, now as long as this is a global color, any sort of change that I make to this color will happen throughout the entire illustration wherever that color is being used. So it's not only making it in the solid, it's making it in the strokes. It's also applying this to my gradient and anything that might have an opacity to it there as well. So I can do that for any of these colors that I'm using. I might want to, let me hit the preview. I might want to make something like this a little bit more contrasting. And you'll notice that not only is it, again, doing it in the gradient within the opacity, but also within those specific patterns that we've made previously that are including that swatch color as well. So this is a great tool to be able to go through and make some global changes to colors within your illustration on the fly and not have to go into each one of those shapes individually. So the next thing that we're going to look at is some type manipulation. So I have this text that I've written out here in illustration. I'm using Mission Gothic Bold here. And let's say we wanted to make some alterations to that text to make it a little bit more interesting, maybe making it more like a specific mark. Well, the first thing we want to do is anytime that we have this working text, I can still come in here and type any additional letters that I want to and make any sort of changes. And once we have that where we want it, then what we're going to want to do is, I always like to copy the text, leave that original the way that it is so that we can always come back to it if need be. So I'm just going to copy that, either Command C and paste, or you can use the Option key and just drag and click down there. And we're going to come up here to Type. We're going to select this one here. We're going to come up to Type, and we're going to go to Create Outlines. And what that does is it's no longer a group of letters or text. It's now shapes. So I can no longer edit this like text, but what it does give me the ability to do is to edit it like shapes. So now, instead of being able to go in and double click and type on these, I can actually treat each one of these like a specific shape. So if I use my direct select tool, my white arrow, I can actually go into some of these letter forms and move them if I want to, and kind of position them to start to curate them over the specific shape here. So I'm just grabbing different anchor points and bringing them out. As long as I hold my shift key, it'll bring that out straight for me. And I'm just kind of making some rough alterations to this word mark here. So as long as I click and drag and grab several of these anchor points at once, I can kind of manipulate them all at once, or I can manipulate them individually if I need to here as well. So as you can see, I'm just making some quick sort of changes here to get some overall type manipulation. So we've outlined the type, and we've been able to manipulate this a little bit further here and kind of create a custom typeface here. Now, another thing that we could do is by selecting the direct selection tool. Let me use this T here. Is you'll notice when I select on the direct selection tool, it brings up these little dots in the corners, and what that is it gives you the ability to make live rounded corners here. So if I click on one of those, you'll notice that if I start to bring it in, it's actually going to round out all the corners within this letter form. Now, that's kind of cool, but what it doesn't necessarily give me the ability to do is select and choose which ones I want. So even though I may want the ends to be rounded, I might not want my sort of corners inside to be rounded. So another way that I can do that is just by selecting the individual anchor points by holding Shift, or clicking and dragging and holding Shift to select all of them except the ones that are in the that are in the inside there. Now I can actually go through and make the changes just to the specific anchor points that I've selected, basically, right? So if we wanted to make some unique rounded corners on some of those letter forms, that would be one way we could do that as well. And you'll notice that we can click and drag in here, and we can also go in and type a specific corner radius up here at the top as well. Maybe you want that to be 10, and you want that to be throughout all of these. You're going to use that 10 to kind of create a unique typeface. So that's another way that we can kind of start to manipulate the type once we've outlined it, utilizing these live corners. So the next thing that we're going to look at is the blend tool here. And this can be a really handy tool to change shapes from one shape to another, and also have a gradient of color change. So you'll notice that I've already kind of done this down here between these two different shapes. You can see how it starts as this circle and kind of ends as this more organic shape, the circle being blue, the organic shape being green, and that transition from the circle into that organic shape as well as from the blue to the green in this designated sort of path that I've created here as well. And in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is select both of the shapes that we're going to blend. We need to come over here to the blend tool, and we can actually double click into that blend tool to bring up some options. So we have the option of doing smooth color, specified steps, or specified distance. We're going to go ahead and do specified steps right here, and I'm just going to go ahead and hit 5 for now. Now, what that's done is it's told the computer that we're going to do 5 steps within this blending process, and I've already selected these 2 shapes. So as long as I have the blend tool selected, all I need to do is click on the first one and then the second one, and it'll actually make that blend for us. So pretty awesome. It's gone from this blue circle to this green organic shape. Now you'll notice that I put a bit of a curve on this one, and we can do the same thing to this path here. As long as we come up to our path, we can just select our pen tool and add an anchor point here, and then manipulate, how we want that path or that curve to happen. To add a bit of a curve, we can go to the anchor point tool and bring that back into a curved shape here. And this just gives us the ability to, change this, the sort of direction that we're going to have with it. And that will sort of dictate the path that we're taking through this blend tool here. So that's one way to use the blend tool to kind of create 2 organic shapes and changing colors there. Another way to use the blend tool is to create drop shadows like I've done here for this illustration text. So I'm sort of borrowing from the previous step that we've done here. I applied a solid color and a stroke. And a lot of times when I'm doing this drop shadow, I think it's easier to have a solid color and a stroke so that we can kind of see the drop shadow a little bit easier. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to copy this and paste it. So I'm going to go Command C and Command V to paste it in here. And I'm just going to kind of place it behind this, this one here and go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. So now it's sort of sitting behind there. And I'm actually going to just go ahead and make the solid fill the same as my stroke. So I'm just going to literally drag that stroke right into the solid. And maybe bump this over just a little bit here. So we can see now that we're already starting to get our sort of drop shadow that's happening, but it's not quite the drop shadow that we're looking at, right? You can still just tell that these are 2 different shapes, and we can see that this sort of connection on the bottom one that we've done more seamlessly is not quite the same up at the top. And that's where the blend tool can come in really handy. So again, I'm going to go over to the blend tool. I'm going to double click on that. And this time I'm going to put in a specified step of, say, 30. I want this to kind of be a smooth color transition here. So again, as long as I have both of these selected, I'm just going to drag over both of those with my arrows. I'm going to come to my blend tool here. And as long as I click on both of those, you'll see that it's actually blending those 2 pretty seamlessly. Now, if I get in tight, what's actually happening is there's 30 different steps that are making this sort of blend or this drop shadow. But what the illusion happens is this sort of seamless drop shadow, and instead of having to go in and manually make all those connections from the corner of the typefaces, I'm able to kind of seamlessly create the blend between those 2 different type paths there, or shape paths at this point. All right, so continuing on with the Illustrator tips and tricks here. The next thing that we're going to look at is the width tool. And this can be a really handy tool in Illustrator for creating different shapes and applying different widths to strokes. So I'm just going to create some kind of organic shapes here and kind of give you guys an idea of what I'm talking about. Actually, let's go this way. So what's great about this tool is, anytime you're trying to create a specific width to some sort of line, it can be difficult to actually create that line and then come back with the pen tool and sort of retrace it and get some varying widths inside there. So the width tool kind of makes that for you. It kind of does that for you there. So it's over here. It's Shift W is the, and this is the icon for the actual tool. So the first thing that I do when I'm using the width tool is I'll come over to my strokes palette, And for any of the lines that I make, I'll usually make those a butt cap, so it's sort of rounded. And you can even make them a little bit thinner if you'd like to as well. And the first thing you need to do is select the actual shape, and then all you do is just grab the width tool and select a point on the line where you want to make some sort of change to the width. And you just click and you drag out, and you can make it be as wide or as thin if you'd like within that specific area. Now you can make these in several points. Let's say I want to thin it out a little bit right there and then thicken it back up a little bit here as well. You can make those at several points within the line. And then as long as you go back to this width tool, you can actually make adjustments back to those as well. You can sort of change where they're at, or maybe make them a little bit thicker if you want to, or thinner in places. So it can be a really handy tool for changing the width to these different lines. So again, for this one here, I'm just going to come over to my width tool. This time I'm going to grab the sort of edge of it here, and then kind of come in and just create some points where it gets a little bit wider and a little bit thinner, just really playing up the manipulation here. As you can see, I'm going to go a little bit thick there and then go really thin over here at the end. So you can see how we can create some really nice organic shapes, varying the width of those very simply through this as well. So this was just a quick pattern that I made by doing the same thing. I just kind of created a box here. Scoot this guy over so we can do it to the side. And I applied a color to it with a standard width. And then by using the width tool, I can just go in here and start to actually dictate the different sizes of these. So I could maybe make my corners be a little bit smaller if I wanted to, and have the other edges be a little bit larger. And then, you know, with this sort of width tool, I could go in here and create an overall pattern in some way if I wanted to do that as well, just by duplicating these and applying some different scale to this. So you can see how really quickly you could get you know, an overall pattern and be able to manipulate these a little bit further just by the manipulation of that width tool. So that's one step that we can do there. The next thing that we're going to look at is the custom pattern stroke. And this is a really handy tool for borders, or for some sort of treatment. Maybe if you're doing some sort of piping or something where you're going to have a line with a consistent pattern or within that stroke. So what I did was I just created a couple of individual shapes here. I created a square and these two different circles. And what I'm hoping to do is have this become basically a pattern that's going to follow along this path that I've created here. So in order to do that, the first thing I need to do is bring up my brushes, and you can see that I've already kind of created a couple of these here. And once I have my brushes open, all I need to do is actually just select the shapes that I want to become that brush stroke, and I can just select them all at the same time and just drag them right over into my brushes. You'll notice that a little plus icon pops up, and I'm just going to let go of the mouse. And it's going to give me some options here for this new brush. Do I want it to be a scatter brush, an art brush, or a pattern brush? In this particular case, we want to use this as a pattern brush. So I'm going to click OK. And it actually gives me the ability to name this. I'm going to call this square circles. And you can kind of dictate some, if you want it to be fixed, or if you want it to have pressure, depending if you're using a pin. If you want it to have some tilt to it, and select the variance there. In this particular case, I'm just going to leave it fixed. It also gives you the opportunity to change how you want to treat your corners and so on and so forth. I'm not going to get too far into that, but one thing that we can do here is go to stretch to fit or approximate path. I'm going to go ahead and click approximate path here. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And what that's done is it's brought this new brush for me here, this square circles. You can see that I titled it there. So I've already made this path with this blue stroke to it here, but I actually want it to have that brush. So all I need to do is just come over here to my brush, click on that, and it's going to actually just apply that to the entire path here. So you can see how valuable this would be for borders, or again, some sort of overall pattern that you're overlaying into a path. And from there, right now these circles are sort of right butted up next to this other one. It's basically starting and stopping. If you look at this as being an overall shape, they're kind of just butted up right next to each other. So I can actually just double click into that brush if I want to and adjust this further if I wanted to space this out a little bit, maybe 10%. Again, you could start to play with some tilt or some bearing if you wanted to have that, have some sort of change to that, or rotation, I guess, even throughout that as well. You can kind of play with those options a little bit further there as well. That's not making a huge change here because of the specific pattern that we have, but in others it would kind of, you can experiment how these would change. But in theory, this gives you the ability to change these strokes into overall patterns and apply them to different parts of the illustration as well. So that's a really handy tool. So let's see, we have two other things we're going to look at here. We have our halftone swatches and lines. So this is, this guy here. So this is a really helpful one here. Some people have asked me how to create these overall patterns, and we saw this in the very beginning when we were working with the global colors as well. And one way to do this is by creating a pattern up here through the object. So if we come up here to Object and go to Pattern, Make, it's basically going to bring up this new square for us here. And I'm going to decrease the size of this a little bit. I'm going to go 0.5 by 0.5. Whoops, I realize this is not in your guys' window. Excuse me. Let me pull this over. So I just changed the actual size and the height here to 0.5. I could even go smaller if I wanted to. If I wanted to go to 0.25 and 0.25, maybe we'll do that for this particular one. And so basically that brings up this sort of square here. It gives me the option of different sort of patterns, and you'll see how that changes here in a second. But let's start applying some shapes inside here. So if I go to my ellipse and I create some different circles and apply a solid color to that, what I can actually do here is I'm going to bring that right to the center. As long as my smart guides are on, it's going to sort of tell me where that center is. And you can see that it's already starting to create this pattern, right? So any change that I make, it's making that throughout the pattern. It's giving me essentially a preview here. And this is where you can see where the brick by brick sort of staggers them. The brick by column is going to stagger them in a different way. Hexagon column, it's just different ways that they're kind of sandwiched together here. But in this particular one, we're going to stick with grid. So I have this circle in the very center, and then to make this pattern seem seamless, I'm going to actually bring these circles onto the outside corners and line them up with the corners as well. So I'm going to do that on each one of these corners, and even though it doesn't look like it's actually changing much to the pattern, it is, and we'll see why here in a second. We can see even in the preview of our pattern, what we have is we have this circle in the center and then these circles on each corner. And what that's allowing it is this illusion of overlap. So it basically creates this seamless pattern here. So once we've done that, we've created the shapes within this invisible one, or this invisible square. I'm going to go ahead and click Save a Copy. And it's going to bring up this new pattern. I'm going to hit New and hit OK. And I'll hit OK here again. And then I'm going to actually click Done up here at the top. Now what you'll notice is it actually disappeared, right? Because all we were doing was actually creating a pattern. We actually weren't creating any sort of marks on the page. We were just manipulating a pattern here. But what's really cool is if I create a sort of organic shape here, I'm just going to use my pencil tool. Whoops. Sorry, guys. I'll just use my pen tool here. If I create a shape on that specific layer, now what I can actually do is I can bring that pattern into this specific shape just by clicking on that new pattern that I've made here. I need to make sure that I'm on the fill and not the stroke. But what that gives me the ability to do is have this fill in this shape no matter what the size or the shape of it is, right? And it's going to kind of create this seamless pattern here. And you can see how this would be really handy for creating some sort of textile, or even some sort of shading, halftone pattern, or some sort of lines here as well. So same thing can be done with the sort of line pattern here. So if we come over here to the object, I'm just going to do this quickly. Go to make a new pattern. Again, I'm going to make this 0.25 by 0.25. And this time I'm going to just fill half of this square with a rectangle essentially. So I'm just going to go halfway filled, and I'm going to apply this color to it. Whoops, sorry, now I keep putting those patterns in there. And we can see now how this would, again, start to create an overall striped pattern for us. If we wanted to put it on the diagonal, as long as we are stretching out throughout the entire composition, we could do that as well. I'm going to keep this one on the straight. Again, I'm going to save this as a copy. I'm going to put lines, go to OK, and done. And now I can actually use this new one to create this line pattern here as well. So it's really awesome. We can always double click inside here and make any sort of changes if you needed to. If you wanted to actually do the brick by row, or if you wanted to change the brick offset, so on and so forth, the overlap style, lots of different changes that we can do here. And if we wanted to, we can always click done and sort of make that our new pattern in there as well. So it's really cool to be able to give us the ability to make these and be able to overlap these different shapes, and again have this pattern work in the same way for each one of these that we're creating here as well. Oh, that was the new one there. So that is creating the different halftone swatches and lines. And just to show you a little bit further on how these can be utilized, I'm going to go ahead and just erase this one. We can see how we're utilizing this sort of line pattern here to give the illusion of some depth within this sphere here. So if I wanted to do something similar to this, I could just create an ellipse here. I'm going to make it this solid color that I have. And I'm just going to actually copy. Let's go up to Edit, Copy, and paste in front. And this time I'm just going to bring in this ellipse a little bit further here, right? And if I actually, let's see, if I copy this original ellipse that we have, and again we paste that in front and send that to the back, now I can take these two previous ones that I've made, and by using the shape builder tool, I can just get rid of these shapes just so I have this sort of little splinter here that I've created. And I can do something where I give that a solid, and then again create a copy of this one here, copy, paste in front, bring this one over a little bit further even, whoops. And again, I'm going to copy this back one and paste it in front, send that to the back. And now again, I have these two. I'm going to go ahead and again use my shape builder just to create this next little compartment where we get a little bit more of a sliver. And now we can actually use this sort of this pattern that we've created in the past step to give this illusion of this sort of these lines that are utilizing the same color but giving a sort of halftone approach to that, so that it kind of gives the look that it's almost like a tonal quality of that, but still only utilizing two colors there. Last one I wanted to show you, and it's really just utilizing clipping masks, which again some of you guys may be familiar with. Others this may be something new, but essentially clipping masks are really effective for hiding or containing areas of an illustration or an object in a particular shape that you're trying to house them in. So for example, I have this sort of rough S that's moving over this circle here, and you can see here it's sort of contained within the circle here. Even if I click on the shape though, you'll see that it actually still runs outside of that, but then on the bottom it's still being revealed outside of this shape. So one way that we can do that is, I'm going to go ahead and just, actually I'll just erase this guy here, I'll bring this up just a second, let's take a look at this a little bit further. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to contain this shape within this circle here, right? So the first thing that we want to do is actually take this shape, which is going to be the format of the clipping mask, and copy and paste that on front. So the first thing we do is we select the shape that the clipping mask is going to be. We're going to go to copy. We're going to go to paste in front. And it's also a good idea to go to arrange and bring to front, just to make sure, like right there, you saw that it actually popped to the front. Even though we pasted in front, it didn't paste it in front of all of our objects, and we need it to be in front of the object that we're going to have be within the clipping mask. So it's really important to go up to that object, arrange, bring to front. So once that I have this shape in front of the shape that I want to be within the clipping mask, I now need to select both of those. So I'm going to select the shape, which is going to become the clipping mask shape. And I'm also going to select this shape in the background by holding Shift. So now I have both of those selected. If I come up here to Object, Clipping Mask, and Make, or Command 7 is the shortcut, what it does is it contains that shape within the clipping mask, which is what I wanted, right? I have this circle. We can see that it's still going outside of that clipping mask, but it's hiding it, it's containing it within that clipping mask. Now if I wanted to alter this still, I can actually double click inside of this, and when I do so, you'll notice that it opens up this clipping mask group here, and that gives me the ability to move this shape around within this clipping mask and reposition it if I needed to, or even make any sort of changes to that specific shape if I needed to, that sort of thing. So you'll notice that on this one that I made down here, I have this clipping mask that's containing it, but then I also have the shape coming out of the clipping mask on the bottom like it was originally. So in order to give that sort of effect, what I need to do is actually copy this shape and place it in front again, and then get rid of part of that top. So it's just a bit of a trick here. So what I can actually do is double click back into my clipping mask again. I'm going to click on this shape that I have. I'm going to go to Edit, Copy, and then I'm going to back out of the clipping mask. I can either back out one level by using the arrow here and going all the way back so that I'm working with my, my original artboard again. And now I'm going to come up here to Edit, Paste in Front. Now what that's done is it's pasted that exact shape that I had right on top, right? So now I can see, well, it's not within my clipping mask anymore, but I have this additional shape here. Well, all I really need to do here is just erase this top portion of it. So I could either click the individual anchor points and erase that, or change the shape somehow. Another way I could do it is just by using the eraser tool. So the eraser tool can be found over here. And as long as I have that shape selected, I can just erase the top portion, and which is going outside of that, and basically leave that bottom portion there. Now what's happening is I still have two shapes here, right? I have the one within my clipping mask, and then I have this new one that I put on top. But since they're the identical shape, and I've just removed that top portion, it kind of gives this illusion of it coming from within this clipping mask and then coming outside of that clipping mask there. So just a little bit of copy and pasting and placement manipulation within that clipping mask to give this illusion of this shape being within the clipping mask and then sort of coming out of the clipping mask there as well. So just some really interesting ways that you can utilize those clipping masks moving forward. So that was the last thing that I wanted to touch base on. I know that that's a lot of different tips and tricks for you, and some of those might be really helpful. Others you may not utilize anytime soon, but hopefully this gives you a little bit more insight into some of the tools, some of the abilities that we have here within Illustrator, and maybe some of these will be some helpful tips and tricks within your book cover project moving forward. As always, let me know if you have any questions, and thank you very much.